This is my daddy's jacket." Her voice didn't shake. It broke, 20 years old, standing alone in the middle of a Montana highway. 15 Hells Angels, motorcycles roaring toward her at full speed, and she didn't move an inch. She raised both hands, and they stopped. Every single one of them. What happened next left the toughest men on that road, completely frozen, not from danger, rather from something they hadn't felt in over 20 years. If the story touches your heart, subscribe to this channel, that bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels. The summer of 2019 didn't start the way Emily Carter expected it to. She planned a quiet birthday, maybe a homemade cake, maybe her dad grilling something on the back porch the way he always did, burning the edges just enough to pretend it was intentional, then laughing that low, rumbling laugh of his when she caught him scraping the black parts off when he thought she wasn't looking. Was supposed to be the summer. That was supposed to be the story. Carter had been missing for 72 hours, and his daughter had run out of people to call. She had called the sheriff's office. Their grown adults leave sometimes. They told her to give it a week. His two closest friends in Dillon, a man named Roy, who repaired fences for a living, and a woman named Patrice, who ran the diner 2 blocks from her father's shop. Neither of them had seen him. Neither of them could explain the feeling in her chest that had been sitting there since Thursday morning. Heavy and cold like swallowing a stone, she had called hospitals. She had driven every road between her father's shop and the county line, had gone back to the shop 3 times in 3 days, and stood in the middle of it alone, turning slowly, looking at everything he had touched and left behind, and asking herself one single question she couldn't answer. "Where are you, Daddy?" And then she found the jacket. It was hanging on the back hook inside his office door, not on display, not folded neatly somewhere, just hanging there the way it had hung there her entire life, like it belonged there. It had always been there, like it was as natural a part of that room as the oil stains on the concrete floor and the coffee mug he never fully cleaned. She had seen that jacket 10,000 times. She had never looked at it, really. She reached for it without thinking. Maybe because it smelled like him. Maybe because her hands needed something to hold. She pulled it off the hook and pressed the collar against her face and breathed. Then for a moment she was 12 years old again. And her father was right there and nothing was wrong. And the world was the size of a small garage in a small town in Montana, and that was enough. Then she felt something inside the lining. Her fingers found the seam first. Then a small, deliberate cut, not a tear, not wear from age. Made with a knife. Careful, straight, the kind of cut a person makes when they are hiding something and want to be sure it stays hidden. Her hands were steady when she reached inside. She didn't know why. Everything else about her was falling apart: her sleep, appetite, her ability to pretend to the neighbors that everything was fine when they asked if she had heard from her daddy yet. Her hands were steady. What she pulled out was a folded piece of paper, a small USB drive wrapped in electrical tape. She unfolded the paper first. There's handwriting. She would know it anywhere. The way he pressed too hard on every letter, the way his G's curled back on themselves, the way he still wrote his 7s with a line through them, the way his own father had taught him when he was a boy in rural Georgia. The note was short. It said, "Emily, if you are reading this, then I am not there to explain. I need you to not be afraid. I need you to be the person I raised you to be. Inside this jacket is everything I know. Knowledge without protection is just a target. Take this jacket, wear it, and find the people who recognize the patch on the left shoulder. They are real. They keep their promises. They will know whose daughter you are. Some ghost sent you." She read it twice. Then she looked at the left shoulder of the jacket. There, she had never paid attention to the patch. To her, it was just part of the jacket, something old and faded that her father had never explained and she had never asked about, because in their house, there was an unspoken agreement. Michael Carter had a past. Her had a present. The two things lived in the same house without ever fully meeting. Now she looked. The patch was round, old leather. The stitching had gone loose in 2 places. The colors had faded from whatever they once were to something between burgundy and brown. In the center, unmistakable even with age, were two words. She recognized the way every person in America recognizes those two words. Hell's Angels. Emily Carter stood in her father's office for a long time after that. She stood there while the sun moved across the floor. She stood there while a truck drove past on the main road outside, and someone's radio played something she couldn't quite hear. She stood there because she was 20 years old, and her father was gone, and the only instruction he had left her was to walk out into the world wearing an old biker jacket and find strangers. Then she put the jacket on. It swallowed her. The shoulders fell to her upper arms. Her sleeves came down past her wrists. At herself in the small mirror her father kept on the wall near the door, the one he used to check if he had grease on his face before he walked to the diner for lunch, and she saw someone she didn't quite recognize. Not because she looked different, because she looked determined. The USB drive into the inner pocket she'd sewn into her own jacket, lining 6 months earlier, a habit she'd picked up from watching her father, though she'd never understood until right now why he had always kept his valuables close to his body and not in a bag. She zipped the jacket halfway. She picked up her keys, and she walked out. Highway 15 between Dillon and Butte on a Tuesday afternoon in late June is the kind of road that makes you feel like you are the only person alive. The sky is too big. The mountains are too far. The towns come and go every 30 or 40 miles. Just enough civilization to remind you that you haven't dropped off the edge of something, and then they're gone again, and it's just pavement and sky and the particular silence that only exists in the American West. Emily had been driving for 2 hours when the gas light came on, into a station outside a town called Lima, barely a town at all, a cluster of buildings that had decided to stay together out of habit, and she was standing beside the pump with one hand on the nozzle and one hand pressed against her stomach the way she did when she was trying not to throw up from anxiety when she heard them. She felt them before she heard them, actually. A low vibration in the ground, a hum that traveled up through the soles of her sneakers and settled somewhere in her spine. She looked up the highway and saw them coming, a long line of motorcycles moving together in the distance, close enough now to hear the individual engines layering over each other into something that wasn't quite sound anymore. Like weather, 15 bikes. She counted them 3 times because her brain kept refusing the number. Pulling into the station, they were moving through, riding in tight formation with the kind of practiced ease that comes from years of moving together on the same roads. She could see the leather. She could see the patches from where she stood. She could see the patch, the same one on the left shoulder of the jacket she was wearing. Her brain did something then that she later described to investigators as the most terrifying and most certain thing she had ever experienced simultaneously. It was like 2 voices talking at the same time, one voice screaming that she was 20 years old and alone. And these were strangers on motorcycles, and she should get back in her truck and drive, and another voice, tighter, lower, that sounded exactly like her father, saying simply, "This is why I left you the note." She dropped the gas nozzle. She didn't think. She walked straight to the center of the highway. She stepped across the white line, past the shoulder, to the pavement itself, and she put herself in the middle of the lane, and she raised both hands above her head. The lead rider saw her from 300 yards. 100 yards, Emily could see him clearly enough to see that he was large and silver-haired and sitting on a motorcycle, the color of midnight, and moving with the absolute confidence of someone who had been doing this for 40 years. 100 yards, she saw him raise his left fist. And 15 motorcycles began to slow. The sound changed, the roar pulling back into something lower, deeper, like an animal settling, and then they stopped. All 15 of them in a diagonal line across the highway, engines still running, exhaust rising in the warm afternoon air. They moved. The lead rider took off his helmet. He was in his mid-50s, a face that looked like it had seen things most faces don't see. Deep lines, gray stubble, eyes that were the particular blue of someone who has spent decades looking at long distances. He looked at her the way a man looks when he is trying to determine very quickly whether the situation in front of him is a threat or a tragedy. One boot on the pavement. You need to move off the road, lady, he said. His voice was even, not aggressive. Hold. Emily didn't move. I can't, she said. Step to the shoulder. We'll talk there. No, she said. I can't. If I step off this road, you keep riding, then I lose you, and I have no idea how to find you again, and I have been driving for 2 hours, and I don't know what else to do. Her voice broke on that last word. Barely. But enough. The lead rider, Daniel Walker, though she didn't know his name yet, said nothing for a moment. The riders had cut their engines now. The silence on the highway was enormous. Say what you came to say, he said. Emily lowered her hands. She reached up with both of them and pulled the left side of the jacket open so the patch on the shoulder faced him directly. She said, "This is my daddy's jacket." Nobody moved. His name is Michael Carter, but his road name was Ghost. He's been missing for 3 days, and he left me a note saying if I was ever in trouble, I should find people wearing this patch and tell them Ghost sent me. Silence. From somewhere behind Daniel Walker, a voice gruff, disbelieving, slightly stunned. Did she just say Ghost? Daniel Walker did not answer that. Eyes had not left the jacket. His face had very still in a way that was different from the careful stillness of before. This was the stillness of recognition, of memory colliding with the present moment with enough force to knock the air out of a room. He stood up off the bike. He walked toward her. He stopped 3 feet away and looked at the patch for a long time. Then he looked at her face, then back at the patch. How old are you? He said. 20, she said. And Ghost is your father? Yes. Here. Michael Carter. He runs a repair shop in Dillon. He's been there since I was born. He never talked about any of this. She gestured at the jacket with one hand. He never explained any of this. And now he's gone. And the only instruction he left me was this. Daniel Walker said, "What's your name, Emily?" She said, "Emily Carter." He looked at her for another long moment. And then something happened in his face that she hadn't expected. Not suspicion, not skepticism, not the calculated assessment of a man deciding whether to believe her. It was something that looked, against all probability, like grief. "Come off the road," he said quietly. "Please." She stepped to the shoulder. He turned back to the other riders. Emily couldn't hear what he said. He spoke too low. Back to her, but she saw the reactions move through the group like a wave. Men looking at each other, a murmur. Someone took off their helmet and held it in both hands the way people hold things when they've just received news that requires a moment to absorb. Then Daniel Walker turned back to her. "I'm going to need you to tell me everything," he said. Sure. She nodded. "And I'm going to need you to understand something first," he said. "Will you tell me anything?" "Okay." He looked at her very directly. "Ghost saved my life once," he said, "and I never got to tell him that it mattered." Emily stared at him. "Saved mine too," she said, after a moment. "Every single day. Just did it by showing up." And Daniel Walker Stone, a man who had ridden across 40 years of American highway without flinching, closed his eyes for just a second, like something had finally settled into place. A promise made a long time ago had just announced itself. He opened his eyes. "All right, Emily Carter," he said. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Leave nothing out." She wrapped her father's jacket tighter around herself, and she started talking. She talked for 40 minutes beside that highway while 15 motorcycles waited, and the Montana sky turned slowly gold overhead. Told him about Thursday morning, how she had shown up at the shop at 10 because her father had asked her to stop by and pick up a part he'd ordered for her truck. The front door was unlocked, but the lights were off. How his truck was in the lot, but his coffee was on the desk, cold, barely touched. How she had stood in the middle of that shop and called his name 3 times before she could bring herself to admit that the silence wasn't normal silence. About calling Roy, about calling Patrice, the sheriff, who was polite, but clearly not treating this as anything other than a man choosing to be somewhere else for a few days. About going back to the shop the second time and searching it properly, opening drawers, checking under the workbench, pulling out old files and finding nothing that told her anything. The tape on the corners. She told him about the third time, how she had gone back not to search, but just to be close to something that still smelled like her father. How she had taken the jacket off the hook without really deciding to. She had found the note. She held up the note. Stone read it twice, just as she had. Then he handed it back to her very carefully. Hands, the way you hand something back when you understand that it is not just paper. Expecting something might happen to him, Stone said.
Yes.
Which means he knew something was dangerous before it happened.
Yes.
And the USB drive. I have it. I haven't looked at it yet. I was afraid to look at it alone. Stone looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned and called back to the group. Hatch. There? Come here. A man in his late 40s broke from the line. Compact, methodical looking, with the careful movements of someone who thinks before every action. Up. And Stone spoke to him quietly for a moment, looked at Emily. Hatch is going to hold on to that drive, Stone said. Look at it. Hold on to it until we can look at it properly with people who know what they're doing. All right with you? Emily hesitated. It wasn't a small ask. Their drive was the only physical thing her father had left her besides the note. Handing it to a stranger on a Montana highway required a level of trust she hadn't built yet. About the note, they keep their promises. Her father had written. She reached into her pocket. She handed the drive to Hatch. He took it with both hands and without a word, put it in a secure pocket against his chest and zipped it shut. Put it at her once and stepped back. Stone said, "Their shop. You said it's in Dillon." "Yes." "Have you let anyone else search it? Anyone official?" The sheriff looked around briefly the first day. There was nothing suspicious. He said, "Your father probably just needed space," Stone said. Blinked. "How did you know?" "Because that's what they always say," he said. There was something in his voice that wasn't bitterness exactly. At her older sibling, "We're going to Dillon. A ride with us. Not on a bike if you're not comfortable. We'll have someone ride alongside your truck. But you are not going back to that shop alone. Why not?" she said. Looked at her steadily. "Because if your father hid something in that shop, besides the jacket and the note," he said, "whoever made him disappear might already know it's there. And they might be waiting to see who comes looking." Emily felt the blood leave her face. Hadn't thought about that. She had been so consumed by grief and the search and the desperate momentum of just moving, or just doing something, that she hadn't once considered the possibility that going back to the shop might not be safe. There had. That was the whole point of the note. He wasn't telling her to run. He wasn't telling her to hide. He was telling her to bring backup before she walked back into the place he had disappeared from. "Hush," she said. Her voice was quieter now. "Okay," Stone said. Put his helmet back on. He looked at her one more time at the jacket, at her face, and at whatever combination of those two things had caused something to shift fundamentally in the way this afternoon was going. Post always said, the day he had a daughter was the day he finally understood what he was fighting for, Stone said. At a campfire outside Billings in 1998, and nobody understood what he meant because he wasn't a father yet. He paused to understand what he meant. He turned back toward his bike. There's stood on the shoulder of Highway 15 in her father's jacket. Loradas, watching 15 motorcycles, arrange themselves around her truck ahead of it, flanking it like something she had only ever seen in movies. Hard, like a guard, like a family, like a promise that had been waiting 25 years to be kept. In her truck, she gripped the steering wheel. She exhaled. And for the first time in 72 hours, Billy Carter did not feel alone. The convoy moved south on Highway 15 the way Stone's chapter always moved tight, deliberate, and without wasted motion. Emily followed the rhythm of it from inside her truck, watching the bikes ahead of her hold their formation that felt almost military. Nobody was rushing. Nobody was scattered. They moved like a single organism that had learned, over many years and many miles, exactly how much space each part of it needed. She gripped the steering wheel with both hands and told herself to breathe. Drive to Dillon was 50 minutes. She knew every mile of it. She had driven it her whole life to school, to the grocery store. shop after her shift ended at whatever part-time job she was working that season. She knew where the road dipped near the old bridge. She knew the exact spot where the cell signal died for about 3 miles and then came back. She knew the billboard for a steakhouse that had been closed for 11 years but somehow kept its sign standing. None of it felt familiar right now. What felt real? The only thing that felt real was the jacket on her shoulders and the note folded in her left hand and the question she had been circling for 3 days without being able to land on an answer. Where was her father? And was he still alive, enough to come back from wherever they had put him? She pushed that last part away. You could not drive 50 miles thinking like that. You had to stay on the surface of things. She turned the radio off because whatever was playing felt like an insult. Away to Dylan, the bike riding directly ahead of her, a man she would later learn went by the name Deacon, slowed slightly and moved to the right. Stone pulled up alongside her driver's side window. He matched her speed exactly and made a gesture with 2 fingers toward the shoulder. Held her window down. The wind was loud. You doing all right? He called over. Fine, she said, which was not true, but was the most she could manage. Their shop, he said. Do you have a key? Yes. Always had a key. Anyone else? She thought. He has a spare, maybe Patrice. He trusted both of them. Anyone from before Dylan? She hesitated. It was a different question. Before Dylan was her father's shorthand for anything he didn't discuss. Its own category of time, sealed off, existing only as the reason he was the way he was, without ever explaining why he was that way. No, she said honestly. Stone nodded once. Hey, when we get there, don't go in first. Let me and Hatch go first. You think someone's inside. I think your father was careful, Stone said. All people make careful enemies. He pulled back into the formation before she could ask what that meant. Already, she rolled her window up. She drove the last 20 minutes to Dylan with that sentence sitting in the passenger seat beside her. Careful people make careful enemies. She had always known her father was careful. She had grown up with it, the spare key hidden in a particular place, always backed into the driveway instead of pulled in nose first, of sitting with his back to walls in restaurants, the way he always knew exactly who had come and gone from any room he entered. Of these things as quirks, as the particular texture of who Michael Carter was. She had never once connected them to a past she didn't have access to. She was connecting them now. Pulled into Dylan, and the convoy turned onto the street where her father's shop sat, a square building with 2 garage bays and a small office and a gravel lot that her father swept twice a week because he said a clean lot told customers everything they needed to know about how he treated their vehicles. Emily felt something tighten in her chest. Something was obviously wrong. That was the problem. Something being obviously wrong was its own kind of wrong, because the last 3 days had taught her that danger did not announce itself with broken windows and overturned furniture. And it announced itself with cold coffee and a truck in the lot and a silence where a person used to be. Stone pulled his bike to a stop in the lot and was off it before the engine finished settling. He didn't say anything to her. He just looked at the building for a moment, and unhurried, and then looked at Hatch, and some communication passed between them that didn't require words. Hatch moved to the right. Stone moved to the front door. Their riders, Emily, hadn't spoken to spread wide without being told. Emily stayed beside her truck the way Stone had told her to. She watched Stone try the front door. Locked. He turned back to her with one hand extended and gave him the key. He unlocked the door and pushed it open and went in, and the waiting was the worst 8 seconds of Emily Carter's life. Stone appeared in the doorway. Clear, he said. In. She walked into her father's shop. It was exactly as she had left it that morning, holes in their places. The old radio on the shelf in the corner, unplugged. Her father's coffee mug on his desk, which she had washed and set upside down to dry because she hadn't been able to look at it, sitting there with the cold coffee still in it, of oil and metal, and something underneath both of those smells that was just her father, the particular chemistry of a man who had worked in the same space for 20 years and left himself in every surface. Stone was standing in the middle of the shop, looking at it the way he had looked at the jacket, like he was reading something. Your father ran a clean operation, he said. Well, he was clean about everything, Emily said. Stone picked up a repair manual from the workbench, back down, walked to the small office doorway, and looked in without entering. Told me, he said, conversationally, still looking into the office. Emily froze. What? Stone turned 14 months ago. I recognized the number. It's not common for people from a previous chapter to reach out without going through the right channels. Almost didn't pick up. He paused. He didn't say his name on the call. He said, this is someone you owe a debt to, and I'm calling in a favor. And I knew his voice immediately. I haven't heard it in 20-something years, and I knew it in 3 seconds. Emily stared at him. What did he want? She said. He wanted to know if the Brotherhood's word still meant what it used to mean, Stone said. He wanted to know if a promise made in 1997 was still good in 2018. What promise? Stone looked at her for a long moment. Then he walked to the chair in the corner of the shop, her father's thinking chair, the wooden thing he'd had since before she was born, and he sat down in it the way people sit when they are about to say something that takes a minute to start. 997, he said. Your father Ghost was already thinking about leaving the life. He hadn't told anyone yet, but it was in him. You could see it if you knew what to look for. I knew what to look for because I had thought about leaving myself 3 years before that and hadn't done it. Emily sat on the workbench opposite him. It was cold through her jeans. He found out something that year, Stone said. Something that involved a man inside our chapter, who was using the Brotherhood's reputation and our routes to move things that none of us had agreed to move. Everyone knew. But your father found out. What kind of things? Emily said. Of things that get people killed, Stone said simply. Of things that get organizations destroyed if the right people find out at the wrong time. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. Trust came to me. Not to the president, not to the sergeant at arms, because he said I was the only one he trusted to hear what he had found without either covering it up or blowing it up before we had a plan. He was right about that. Stone paused. We handled it quietly. The man involved was removed. The activity stopped. Nobody went to prison. Nobody got hurt. And 3 months later, Gus told me he was leaving to start a new life somewhere quiet. You let him go, Emily said. Him out, Stone said, and I told him he was one of the most capable and principled men I had ever ridden with, and that if he ever needed anything, the door was open. He shook my hand and said he hoped he'd never need it. He looked at her, and then 14 months ago, he called and said he might need it. Emily felt something cold move through her. What was happening 14 months ago? He didn't tell me on that call. He said he needed to be sure of something first. He said he would call back. Stone's jaw tightened. Called back. The shop went quiet. Hatch appeared in the doorway from outside. Stone, you need to come look at something. They both came out. Hatch was standing at the side of the building, near the secondary entrance, a metal door that led to the storage area where her father kept overflow parts and old files and the things that didn't fit anywhere else. It was closed. Emily had not noticed anything wrong with it on her previous visits. Thus, Hatch pointed to the doorframe. There were marks in the metal. But the kind of marks a particular tool makes when someone is attempting to determine whether an alarm system is wired to a door without actually opening it. Already been here, Hatch said, before us. Couldn't go in. But they came close. Emily looked at the marks and felt sick. What were they looking for, she said. Same thing we are, Stone said. Whatever your father left behind besides the jacket. He looked at her. Emily. The note said the jacket had everything he knew. The USB drive is part of that. But your father was a careful man who plans for things, doesn't put everything in one place. She understood what he was saying before he finished saying it. Anything else in the shop, she said. There might be, Stone said. We need to find it. They come back and find it first. She went back inside. She stood in the middle of the shop and tried to think like her father. Like his daughter, not the version of this building that existed in memory and sentiment, but like Michael Carter, who backed his truck in and sat with his back to walls and called in a 20-year-old debt before he had confirmed he needed it. Where would he put something important? Not in the obvious places. He already searched those. Not in the office. The office was the first place anyone would look, and her father would have known that. But she looked at the vehicles in the shop. There were two: a pickup belonging to a rancher outside of town that her father had been working on when he disappeared, an old sedan that had been there so long it had become part of the furniture. Nobody claimed, and her father couldn't bring himself to junk because it still ran. And he said a running car deserved better than the crusher. Walked to the sedan. She opened the driver's door. She got in and sat in the driver's seat, which she had never done. The seat was pulled all the way back. It smelled like dust and old upholstery and something faintly chemical. She looked at the glove compartment. She opened it. Inside, behind the vehicle's manual, which was for a 1987 model, and therefore had no connection to any technology her father used, a flat envelope, sealed, her name written on it in her father's handwriting. Breathing for a second. Then she called out, "Dope." He came. He looked at the envelope. He looked at her name on it. He put it somewhere only you would think to look, Stone said quietly. Emily said, "He put it somewhere he thought I would think to look if I was thinking like him. Always told me the best hiding place is somewhere that requires the person looking to become the person who hid the thing." She held up the envelope. Taught me how he thinks. He was banking on that. Stone looked at her with something that had moved past grief into something quieter and steadier, like recognition. "Open it," he said. She broke the seal. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper and a handwritten list of names, even names, with a column beside each one containing dates, amounts, and three-letter abbreviations she didn't recognize. Below the list, her father had written two sentences. First said, "This is what they are hiding. This is why they took me." The second said, "About this, you were right about everything I tried to teach you. Use it." Emily's hand was shaking, not from fear this time, from the specific trembling that comes when grief and love and purpose collide inside a person's chest at the same moment. She passed the paper to Stone. He read it once. He went very still. Then he passed it back to her, carefully, with both hands. "Recognize the names," she said. "Two of them," he said. "One is a judge. One is a regional director for a company that runs freight logistics across 6 states. My father repairs vehicles," Emily said. "They repaired vehicles?" Stone corrected gently. "That company. Or for contractors who moved freight for that company." He folded his arms, which means he had access. And at some point, something he saw or heard or found in a vehicle didn't add up. Was the kind of man who couldn't look away from something that didn't add up. She knew that was true. She had watched it her whole life, a customer who tried to pay with a check when they'd always paid cash. Every time that didn't make sense. A conversation at the counter that her father absorbed silently and then mentioned to her later with a careful observation and a question. "Does that seem right to you, Em? Because it doesn't seem right to me." She had always thought he was teaching her to pay attention. It was. But he had been paying attention himself for years, and somewhere along the way, what he was paying attention to had become dangerous. Hatch Stone called toward the door. Hatch came back in. Stone handed him the list of names. Hatch looked at it for 30 seconds. His expression didn't change the way most people's expressions change. Impressed instead, tightened at the edges, everything drawing inward, a particular stillness of a man who has learned that showing a reaction to dangerous information before you have decided what to do with it is its own kind of vulnerability. "That's federal," Hatch said. "I know," Stone said. I know." Hatch handed the paper back and said nothing else. That said everything. Emily looked at both of them. "What does federal mean, exactly, in this context? What does that change?" Stone turned to her. There was no softening in the answer he was about to give. Stone was not a man who softened things, and she had already understood that about him, and she was grateful for it. It means whoever these people are have enough power to make mechanic disappear without leaving enough of a footprint for a local sheriff to notice, he said. Well, it means the resources behind this are not small. And it means that the 14 months between your father calling me and your father going missing were likely spent being watched very carefully by people who were waiting for him to do exactly what he did, hide the evidence and try to warn. R1. They were waiting for him to move, Emily said. And when he moved, they moved. She stood up from the driver's seat of the old sedan. She zipped her father's jacket all the way up. Then we have to move faster than they expect us to, she said. I studied her for a moment. Then, for the first time since the highway, the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. More like the acknowledgement of a thing he had suspected and was now confirming. Father said the same thing to me in 997, he said, almost word for word. Did it work then, she said. Well enough, he said. We're all still standing. She nodded. Let's go. Hatch was already on his phone by the door, not speaking, texting in the rapid and precise way of someone who knows exactly who needs to know what. Stone took one more look around the shop before they left, searching. Just the last look of someone who understands that a place is about to become a different kind of place, not a repair shop anymore. A small town building that smelled like oil and 20 years of honest work. Evidence. A location with a meaning attached to it. A place that would need to be examined by people in gloves with equipment and the kind of patience that justice requires when it is done carefully. Outside, the riders were waiting. 14 men standing or sitting near their bikes, impatient, not restless, but ready. The Say soldiers are ready, uptight with anxiety, but settled into a state of preparedness that could move instantly in any direction the moment it was needed. One of them, a man Emily would later learn, was called. Briggs walked up to her as she came out of the shop, older than most of the others, thick gray beard, eyes that had the particular quality of deep steadiness you only get from surviving several things you didn't think you were going to survive. My name's Briggs, he said. I rode with Ghost back in 94 and 95. Share your time. Yes, sir, she said. He was the best man I ever knew in that life, Briggs said. I don't say that to a lot of people because I don't mean it about a lot of people. He paused. They taught me something once. Said, the measure of a man's character is not what he does when people are watching. He protects when nobody is. Emily had heard that before. Her father, at the kitchen table when she was 15, during an argument about something so minor she couldn't remember what it was. He had said something exactly like that. She had thought it was one of his general life lessons. She had not understood until this moment that it was something he lived personally, something specific, something that referred to choices he had made in a life she had never been allowed to see. He said the same thing to me, she told Briggs. Briggs nodded. I know. He stepped back. That was all he had needed to say. Young came and stood beside her. He had the look of a man who has made a decision and is now organizing the practical consequences of it. You need to move your father's office files before anyone else comes looking, he said. Dutch has made contact with someone who can look at the drive and the list with the right clearances and enough distance from the official channels that it won't get buried before it sees daylight. Who? Emily said. Who owes me more than a phone call, Stone said. You need to know right now. She accepted that. For now. And my father, she said. Stone looked at her directly. On the evidence trail, he said. We follow it, and we don't stop until it tells us where he is. And if the trail goes somewhere, she stopped. Heard it again. And if it tells us something I don't want to hear, there was no pause. No careful diplomatic softening. Then we deal with that together, Stone said. Nope. You're not doing any part of this alone. That's the last time you're alone in this. Understand me? Emily Carter looked at this man she had met 4 hours ago on a Montana highway. The Roders, this man who had known her father by a name she had never heard, who had spent 40 years doing things she would never fully know and carrying weights she would never fully understand, and who had hesitation turned 15 motorcycles around and walked into a potentially dangerous building and read a piece of paper with federal implications on it and said, "We," without breaking stride. I understand, she said. Stone nodded once. Then he put his helmet on. convoy that had already changed direction once that afternoon changed direction, again moving with the same tight, deliberate precision as before, but towards something different now. An unknown destination, not a young woman standing alone in a highway with her arms raised. The truth. Cautered, a man named Ghost, who had disappeared, believing his daughter would figure out how to find the people who would know what to do. Her. He had been right about that. He had been right about all of it. Her got back in her truck. She put her hands on the wheel. She exhaled. And then she followed the motorcycles north. Drove north for 2 hours before Stone pulled the convoy off the main road. A little bit without-bound. Emily followed without question. She had stopped asking where they were going somewhere around the first hour, not because she had given up on knowing, but because she had realized something during those miles of watching the bikes hold their formation ahead of her. These men moved the way her father thought, deliberately. A plan they didn't feel the need to explain at every step. Mother had never told her where they were going on a drive until they were almost there. Always said that knowing a destination too early made people impatient with the distance. So, she had inherited enough of him to understand that now. It's the property outside a small town. She didn't recognize a place with a long gravel drive and a large outbuilding that sat behind a main house and was clearly the kind of structure built for function and not for appearance. Was off his bike before she had cut her engine, on his phone before she had opened her door, out and stood beside her truck and waited. Hutch came to stand near her. He didn't say anything for the first minute. He just stood there in the way that some men stand near people who are upset, not crowding them, performing concern, just being present in the particular way that communicates you are not going to disappear on this person. You've done this before, Emily said. Not really a question. What? Hatch said. This. Moving fast, figuring out who to trust and who to call and what to do next when the normal channels are useless. Hatch was quiet for a moment. Normal channels are designed for normal situations, he said. When a situation is not normal, you need people who know how to operate in the space between the rules. They understood that. It's part of why he was good at what he did. In the life, Hunters, you mean, Emily said. In the life, Hatch agreed. Honestly, in the shop, in Dylan, in how he raised you. She looked at him. You didn't know my father. No, Hatch said. But I've known Stone for 19 years. Stone talked about Ghost exactly twice in all that time. There's when a younger writer asked him to name the most capable man he'd ever worked alongside. And he thought we were going to lose someone we cared about. And he needed to say out loud what loyalty actually looked like. Emily absorbed that. What did he say about him? He said, Ghost was the only man he'd ever known who could walk into a room full of dangerous people and make every single one of them feel like the most watched person in it, saying a word. Hatch glanced at her sideways. Then he said Ghost left because he loved someone more than he loved being right. Emily felt that land somewhere low in her chest. Never told me any of that, she said quietly. Parents don't usually, Hatch said. The things they sacrifice for you are the things they carry alone. Because if they told you, you might feel responsible for it. And they don't want you to feel responsible. They just want you to live the life they made possible. She didn't answer that. Sheik Stone came back from the call. His face had the quality of someone who has just received information that rearranges everything and is now doing the internal work of rearranging it quickly enough to act. Harris can see us tonight, he said. Who's Marcus? Emily said. Her federal investigator, private now, has the clearance to look at what's on that drive without triggering any of the automated flags that would alert the kind of people who might want this buried before it surfaces. Stone paused. Shows me a significant favor from 2011 that he has been very grateful never to have been called in. Tonight, Emily said. Stone confirmed. 2 hours from here. Emily looked at her watch. It was nearly 5 in the afternoon. She had been awake since before 6 that morning and had eaten nothing since a gas station coffee at 7 and a granola bar she'd found in her glove compartment somewhere around noon. Briggs appeared at her elbow. He was holding a paper bag and a bottle of water. "Sir," he said simply. Set it down on the hood of her truck. Walked away. She didn't argue. Inside the bag was a sandwich from somewhere, and an apple, and a bag of chips and a cookie that was slightly crushed, but clearly included on purpose. She ate standing up beside her truck, while Stone organized something on the other side of the lot and the other riders moved in and out of the outbuilding. She was on the last half of the sandwich when her phone rang. Unknown number. She stared at it for 3 rings. Then she picked up. Silence on the other end. Then a sound of breath, slow and deliberate, the kind a person takes when they are trying to locate their own voice. The sandwich hit the gravel, Daddy. The word came out broken in 2 places. She didn't try to fix it. Listen to me. His voice was low and carefully controlled. The way it got when he was serious, not frightened. Performing calm, but actually calm in the specific way of a man who has decided that falling apart is not an option and has enforced that decision internally. Have long. I'm on a phone that won't be a phone for more than about 90 seconds. Are you safe? Yes, I'm safe, Daddy. Where are you? I'm alive. I'm not hurt badly. I need you to tell me something important, and I need you to do it fast. Find the jacket? Yes. Did you find the envelope in the sedan?
Yes.
But we have the drive. We have the list. A breath? Good girl. Okay. A pause, and in the pause, she heard something in the background, something that told her nothing and everything simultaneously. Who are you with? Stone, she said. Daniel Walker, owners and his chapter. Silence, a different kind of silence this time. Then you actually found them. I stood in the middle of the highway, she said. One came from him then, that she had never heard her father make. Something that was not quite a laugh, but came from the same place laughs come from. Something that sounded like a man who had spent 72 hours holding himself together, finally, finding one small thing to let go of. Of course you did, he said. Of course you did, Daddy. Tell me where you are. Tell me I can't tell you where I am because I don't know precisely. I don't know the direction. I know approximately how far. But I know who has me. His voice dropped even lower. That drive is enough. It's more than enough. They need to know there's a man who can testify to the chain of custody on every piece of it. Because without testimony, the documentation can be challenged. I know I exist. That's why they took me, not to silence me yet, but to find out who else knows. They're going to ask you, Emily said. They're going to keep asking me, he said, which means I have time. Which means you have time, but not unlimited time. Stone has a contact, she said, who can look at the drive tonight. Someone with federal clearance. Name? Her father said sharply. Marcus. I don't have a last name, a beat. Marcus Riley? She pulled the phone from her ear, and she called across the lot. Marcus's last name. Really? Stone turned. He looked surprised to be asked. Hi. She put the phone back. Riley, she said. There made a sound. I know, Marcus Riley, he said. Crossed paths. In 2004, he's good, he's trustworthy. Stone to have Marcus look specifically at the manifest files. They'll be labeled with a date sequence starting in March 2017. That's where the cleanest chain is. That's the evidence that doesn't require my testimony to hold. Okay, she said, every word. March 2017. Manifest files. Chain of custody. His voice changed. Operational to something underneath operational, the layer that had always been there, that she had grown up inside of, that was not the careful man or the plan ahead man or the quiet man at the counter, noting things that didn't add up. It was just her father. Just Michael. I am so sorry I couldn't explain all of this to you while I had the chance. Don't, she said. Apologize right now. I need to. You can do it in person, she said. Apologize for everything when I see you in person. He was quiet for a moment. My girl, he said. The line went dead. Emily stood absolutely still for a count of 5. Phone was still pressed to her ear, even though it was silent. Her hand was shaking. The sandwich was on the gravel at her feet. The late afternoon light was falling across the lot, and she was aware of all of it, the light, the sound of someone's boot shifting weight somewhere behind her, with the extreme clarity that arrives when your nervous system has just processed something enormous and hasn't decided yet what to do with it. Stone's voice, close. She turned. He was 3 feet away, crossed the lot quietly. which for a man his size required a certain deliberate effort. Had done it on purpose. He was looking at her face and reading it the way he read situations methodically. Projection. That was my father, she said. Stone's expression did not change outwardly, but something moved behind it. Alive. He's alive. He doesn't know exactly where he is, but he said he has time. He said the manifest files on the drive from March 2017 are the cleanest evidence chain. Knows Marcus Riley. Stone processed that. All of it in sequence, the way a man processes information when he cannot afford to prioritize the emotional weight of it over its practical usefulness. You on a borrowed phone, Stone said, which means someone is holding him in a place where people have phones. Eliminates certain types of locations. He said he knows the direction and approximately how far, Emily said. Or he didn't say from where. From Dylan, Stone said. If he disappeared from Dylan, direction distance would be measured from there. He turned and called across the lot, Hatch, get the map. Hatch was already moving. Emily watched Stone's shift modes in real time. Her tinged recognition of earlier in the day, the man sitting in her father's chair, talking about campfires and promises and the weight of what Ghost had once done that was still present. It had moved to the background. In the foreground now was the part of Daniel Walker that had spent 40 years keeping people alive and organized and moving in the right direction on difficult terrain, that had made 14 other men follow him north without knowing exactly why, but purely on the basis of his judgment. She understood, for the first time, why her father had trusted this man specifically. Hatch spread a map across the hood of the nearest vehicle. Leaned over it. Emily came to stand beside him, and she did not look at it with a stranger's eyes. At it with her father's eyes, the habit he had given her of tracing routes from a fixed point, asking what is accessible and what is hidden and what requires specific knowledge to find. On 72 hours, Stone said. He's alive and not badly hurt. They want something from him, which means they're keeping him somewhere that can contain him without medical access being immediately necessary. Private property, remote enough to avoid notice, close enough to where the operation runs, that whoever took him can manage it without a long communication chain. He pointed to a section of the map. Logistics company your father repaired vehicles for its regional hub is here. If the people who took him are the people running the operation, their infrastructure is centered around that hub. They'd want to keep him within reach of that infrastructure. Emily studied the map. It was northeast of Dylan, maybe 60 miles. There. He said he knows the direction, she said. Northeast, and he can tell the direction. He'd know because of the light, Hatch said quietly. Of day, angle of sun. Your father would track that automatically. She looked at Hatch. You that too, Stone said. No, Emily said. Not me. Both men looked at her. He used to make me navigate without using my phone, she said. Drives, back roads, no GPS. He'd say, find north. Tell me what you know. I thought it was a game. Her jaw tightened. He was preparing me. The weight of that took a moment to settle over all of them. The particular weight of understanding that a person you love was thinking about your survival long before you knew it needed thinking about. Stone straightened up from the map. We go to Marcus tonight, he said. We give him the drive, the list, and your father's specific instructions about March 2017. While he's working that, we work the location problem from this end. By morning, we need two things. A legal case, solid enough that going to the right federal contact doesn't result in a cover-up, location specific enough to act on. What does acting on it look like? Emily said. I need to understand what that means. Stone looked at her. He didn't look away. It means we find him and we get him out, he said. Whatever door that requires us to open. That's not a plan, she said. That's an intention. Stone held her gaze for a moment. Then he said, you're right. The plan is what Marcus builds from what's on that drive. The intention is what gets us in the car to drive to Marcus tonight instead of waiting until tomorrow. He paused. Sometimes intention has to come before the plan. The intention is what the plan runs on. She accepted that because she had lived with a man who operated the same way. Move first, then figure out the exact shape of the movement. Convoy reorganized to make the 2-hour drive to Marcus Riley's location. They decided to take a smaller group, 5 riders, because arriving at a former federal investigator's property with 15 motorcycles at 9 at night was the kind of thing that drew attention. Even in places where attention was otherwise minimal. Only drove. Stone rode beside her, passenger window level, whole 2 hours. They didn't talk much for the first hour. Of silence that falls between people who have shared enough over a short enough time that they have moved past the need to fill space. Adam and Stone said, "Your father used to sing." She looked at him through the window, surprised. What? On long rides, not loud, not performing. Quietly to himself. Old country stuff, mostly. But Williams, some Waylon Jennings. He glanced at her. You didn't know that. I've never heard him sing anything in my life, she said. Different versions of themselves, Stone said. Worse. Just different. He became the version of himself that was right for building the life he wanted to build. Left some things behind. That doesn't mean the things he left behind weren't real. Like the singing, she said. The singing, Stone agreed, and the jokes. Lord, I could tell a story that made you forget you were exhausted and cold and in a situation you'd rather not be in. Emily smiled despite herself. It hit her like a surprise, the smile. Like her face had not expected to do that today and then did it anyway. It does that, she said. Makes you forget the bad thing by telling a story. He does it with customers at the shop when they're upset about the repair cost. With me when he can tell I'm anxious about something. She paused. He did it 3 weeks ago when I called him about a problem at work. By the time he was done talking, I'd completely forgotten what I'd called about. I didn't even notice until the next morning. Stone made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was adjacent to one. He said. That's my dad, she said. They drove in silence for a while after that. The good kind of silence, kind that doesn't need filling. Marcus Riley lived in a property at the end of a long private road that communicated, or you even knocked, that this was a man who took privacy seriously and had the resources to enforce it, and clearly knew it well enough not to be put off by it. Up and parked and was off his bike and walking toward the front before Emily had finished parking her truck. Opened before Stone knocked. Marcus Riley was a compact man in his early 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and the particular posture of someone who had spent decades making themselves appear smaller and less significant than they were, and had continued the habit after it stopped being necessary. He looked at Stone with the measured warmth of someone who is genuinely glad to see a person and is also calculating several things simultaneously. Then he looked at Emily, then at the jacket. He stopped. Pet. Ghost, he said. His daughter, Stone said. Billy. She found us. Marcus Riley stepped back from the doorway and let them in without another word. Inside, he led them directly to a back room that was clearly the working center of his operation, a space that communicated serious intent through its organization rather than its equipment. He sat behind a desk, and Emily sat across from him, and Stone stood by the door. They put the USB drive on the desk between them. My father said to tell you the manifest files dated March 2017 have the cleanest chain of custody, she said. He said you'd know what that means. Marcus Riley looked at her for a long moment with an expression she would spend a long time trying to describe afterward, something between admiration and a very particular sadness of a man who is good at his job and who is good at it because he has seen what happens when people like her father are not protected in time. Pick up the drive. Your father is a thorough man, he said. Yes, she said. And stubborn. Extremely. When I met him in 2004, Marcus said, putting the drive into his system, he was already be done with the life, but he was helping us understand a specific situation that we would not have understood without his assistance. Well, he didn't have to help. He chose to. I asked him why. Once. He said because the truth shouldn't require courage to tell. It should just require telling. He looked at his screen. Always remembered that. The room went quiet as the drive loaded. Marcus's expression shifted as the contents populated on his screen. Emily watched his face the way she watched all faces, now the way her father had taught her. And what she saw there was a sequence of emotions that confirmed everything she had feared and everything she had hoped simultaneously. Fear confirmation. This was real. This was serious. This was big enough to justify everything that had happened. Confirmation. It was also big enough to matter. Colorado. Big enough that the truth of it, if it reached the right people, be quietly folded away. March 2017, Marcus said to himself, then to them. He navigated, clicked in something. He went very still. Then he looked up at Emily. There didn't just find evidence, he said slowly. Documented a complete operation, transaction records, communication logs, vehicle manifest cross-references. He stopped, began again. This is 18 months of careful, medical documentation from someone who understood exactly what he was building and how it needed to hold up. Emily's throat tightened. 18 months. Her father had been doing this, collecting, documenting, building a case for 18 months before he disappeared. For 18 months, he had gone to the shop and repaired vehicles and swept the lot twice a week and grilled on the back porch on weekends and called her when she was anxious about work, also while quietly and precisely building something that could survive without him if it had to, all while knowing that it might have to. He knew they were watching him, she said. Isn't a question? Yes, Marcus said. And he knew the documentation was the only leverage that could protect him. If they believed he was the only one who knew the shape of it, they'd take him. But if there was a record, he gestured at the screen. He created a record that could survive him, and he trusted his daughter to deliver it. Stone spoke from the doorway for the first time in several minutes. Can you move on it? Marcus leaned back. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, in the manner of a man calculating risks at speed. Then he leaned forward again. I know a deputy director in the Helena field office, he said. She has her own history with the company named in these files. She has tried twice to open this kind of investigation and been shut down both times by people above her who had reasons to want it shut down. He looked at Stone. With this documentation, the case doesn't need to be opened from above. It comes from the evidence itself. They can't shut it down if the evidence is already in the right hands before the wrong hands know it exists. How long? Stone said. Act her safely and get this in front of her without triggering anything premature. Marcus calculated. Hours. Emily felt everything she was carrying shift inside her. Not lift, not yet, but shift into a different configuration. A configuration of something that had been impossible in the morning and was now merely extremely difficult. She knew the difference. Her father had taught her that too. Ours was not the end, but it was the shape of the path to the end. She sat in Marcus Riley's back room and looked at the screen full of her father's 18 months of quiet, dangerous, methodical work, and she pressed both hands flat on her thighs to stop them shaking, and she breathed. Hatch appeared in the doorway behind Stone, caught Stone's eye, and made a small gesture that Emily read as urgency, without alarm, something to pay attention to, not something to panic about. Stone stepped out. Emily heard them speaking in low tones in the hallway. Stone came back in. He looked at Emily. One of the riders made contact with someone in the county north of Dillon, he said carefully. One who noticed a vehicle using a private road on a property that's been listed as vacant for 2 years. Emily stared at him. Here? She said. Tuesday morning, Stone said. The day your father disappeared. The room was very quiet. That's him, Emily said. We don't know that yet, Stone said. But his voice said something different from his words. His voice said, yes, that's him, Stone. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. If that's where he is, Marcus works through the night on the legal route, Stone said. We work through the night on the location. By morning, we have both. Don't move on location without the legal route being secure first. Because if we move without it, everything your father built disappears the moment the people holding him know we're coming. She wanted to argue. Every instinct she had said, move now, go now, drive north tonight and find that road and get him out. That she had inherited enough of her father to know that instinct without strategy was not protection. It was just love in a hurry, and love in a hurry got people killed. Okay, she said. The word cost her something. Stone saw that. He didn't pretend he didn't. 8 hours, he said. And then we move on everything at once. She nodded. She looked at her father's jacket hanging over the back of her chair. Her leather, faded patch. The smell of him faint but present in the lining. There, after all this time, the way people are still present in the things they've loved long enough. 8 hours. She could hold on for 8 hours. She had been holding on for 72 already. It was 8 more. Emily did not sleep. She had told herself she would try. It pointed her toward a small room off the back hallway of Marcus's property, a spare room with a couch and a blanket and a window that faced east, and told her to rest because tired people made mistakes, and they could not afford mistakes in the morning. She had nodded and gone in and sat on the couch and stared at the wall and listened to the sounds of Marcus working 2 rooms away in stone and Hatch murmuring in the kitchen and the occasional vibration of a phone receiving a message. And she had not slept for a single minute. What she did instead was think about her father the way you think about someone. When you are afraid, you might be constructing the last version of them you will ever have access to carefully, completely, trying not to leave anything out. The way he took his coffee, the specific angle at which he held a wrench when he was concentrating, of his boots on the shop floor, heavier on the left side because of an old injury he had never fully explained. The way he said her name when he was proud of her, which was different from how he said it normally, just slightly, enough that she always knew. She thought about 18 months. He had been doing this for 18 months while she visited on weekends and called on Tuesdays and complained about her manager and asked him whether she should adopt a dog. For 18 months, he had been building a case that could survive his own disappearance, quietly, methodically, telling her any of it, simultaneously being the most present and engaged and attentive father she had ever experienced him being. She had thought he seemed more settled in the past year, more content. She had told her friend Jess that her dad seemed like he had finally made peace with something. She had assumed it was age. She had assumed it was the quiet satisfaction of a man who had built a good life and was appreciating it. She had not understood that what she was seeing was a man who had found his purpose again, a man who had spent 25 years being careful in order to protect his daughter, and who had found a situation where all that careful attention could be pointed at something that mattered beyond just survival. He had been happy because he was doing something. He had been settled because he had a plan. He trusted her. She pressed her palms against her eyes and breathed. At 2 a.m, the door opened. She expected Stone. It was Briggs. He came in without apology and sat in the chair across from the couch and looked at her with the direct unsentimentality of a man who had been through enough hard things to know that the question of whether to acknowledge them or not had a clear answer. "Not sleeping," he said. "No," she agreed. "Your father didn't sleep before things either," Briggs said. He used to say sleep was for after, that there was something in the anticipation of action that kept his brain too useful to waste on unconsciousness. "That sounds exactly like him," she said. "Of everyone around him crazy," Briggs said. "He'd be sharp as a blade at 3 a.m. and then pass out for 14 hours straight once a situation resolved. He had its own schedule that had nothing to do with the clock." Emily almost smiled. "Oh, he still does that. He'll stay up all night if something's unresolved, and then sleep half the next day once he figures it out." "Some things don't change," Briggs said. I looked at him. "Can I ask you something?" "You can ask," he said. It was not the same as yes, but was honest. When he left, Emily said, when he walked away from the life and came to Dylan and became a mechanic. There, she stopped, reorganized. Was there any part of the Brotherhood that was angry? Like he'd broken something? Briggs was quiet for a moment. "There were some," he said carefully. "People who felt that leaving without ceremony was a kind of betrayal. A man who rode with the Brotherhood owed something to the group when he chose to go. And you," she said. He looked at her steadily. "I thought it was the bravest thing I'd ever watched a man do," he said. "The leaving, the reason for it. He told me the night before he went. We were sitting outside, and he said, 'Briggs, I found something worth protecting that I cannot protect from inside this life. I'm not going to go protect it.'" Briggs paused. I didn't know what he was talking about until about 2 years later when I heard he had a daughter. And then I understood completely. Emily felt something in her throat that she pushed down hard. Told you, she said. He told me the shape of it, not the details. Briggs looked at his hands. I want you to know something, Emily. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever the next few days look like, there is remembered by the people who matter in this brotherhood as a man of complete integrity. Not because he was perfect, but because he always knew what he was protecting, and he never let convenience talk him out of protecting it. She nodded. She couldn't speak for a second. Okay, she said when she could. Thank you. Briggs stood up. At the door he paused. Someone is going to have something to tell you in about an hour, he said. His contact came through. She sat up straight. Contact. But Briggs had already closed the door. She sat on the edge of the couch with both feet on the floor and her hands on her knees, and she counted the minutes with the specific focus of a person who has been given a fixed point of time to aim at and is using it to hold themselves together. 47 minutes later, Stones knocked. He came in and sat where Briggs had sat and put both forearms on his knees and looked at her directly in the way that had become, over the course of this impossible day, the signal that he was about to say something true and important. Hutch reached out to someone who tracks property records and usage irregularities in 3 counties north of Dillon, he said. Private contractor, does work for insurance companies mostly. He ran the vacant property where the vehicle was spotted Tuesday morning. And Emily said, property is registered to a shell company, Stone said. The company has a parent company, and the parent company shares 2 board members with the freight logistics company named in your father's documentation. The room went very quiet inside Emily's head. A coincidence, she said. No, Stone said. There is not. You know where he is, she said. Stone held her gaze. A strong probability. Strong enough that Marcus agrees it's worth acting on in coordination with the legal contact. Has Marcus reached the deputy director? 3 hours ago, Stone said. She has the documentation. She's been reading all night. Marcus says she called him back within an hour to confirm receipt and then called back again, 40 minutes later, to tell him she had already identified 2 of the names on the list as individuals she had flagged. In her previous investigation attempts, he paused. She's moving, carefully, but she's moving. She's routing around the channels that buried her previous attempts and going directly to a contact at the federal level who she trusts and who has jurisdictional authority to act. Emily stood up. She didn't plan to. Her body simply decided that receiving this information while sitting down was no longer acceptable. She said, she needs until 6 in the morning to have enough in place that the action is legally protected, Stone said. Right now it's 3:12. Less than 3 hours. Property, she said. Who goes to the property? Stone looked at her for a long moment. There's federally coordinated action, he said. Marcus's contact is looping in a tactical team through the federal channel. And clean, with warrants, with enough legal coverage that nothing can be suppressed after the fact. And where are we? Emily said. After a long moment. We are in a vehicle, she said, on a public road, adjacent to that property. 5:55 in the morning. Emily stared at him. Not legal involvement, she said. No, Stone agreed. I had a guarantee that the people who care most about the outcome of this operation are present and accounted for when it resolves. And it means that if anything goes sideways, if anything is communicated incorrectly or misidentified, or there are people there who know what Michael Carter looks like, Emily said. Yes, Stone said simply. She looked at him. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, he said. He stood. 2 hours and 48 minutes. No, she said. I'm not going to sleep. No, he agreed. Probably not. He moved to the door, then stopped, turned back. Your father said something to me on that campfire in 9,998. I told you, he said he finally understood what he was fighting for when he had a daughter. But I didn't tell you what he said after that. Emily waited. Litters, he said. Stone, I think she's going to be the best thing I ever do. I think she's going to be braver than me. And that scares me to death in the best possible way. He looked at her steadily. Right on all 3 counts. He closed the door. Emily sat back down on the couch. She pulled her father's jacket over herself like a blanket. She pressed the collar against her face the same way she had in the shop. The beginning of all this before she found the note and the drive and the patch that changed the direction of everything. Closed her eyes. She did not sleep, but she rested. That was enough. At 5:40 in the morning, Marcus came to find her himself. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee, and he set one in front of her without asking and sat across from her and looked at the screen of the tablet he was carrying with the focused attention of a man tracking something in real time. To be Director Hartman has filed, he said. Federal warrants executed at 5:22. Practical approach to the property is coordinated for 6:05. Emily wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. Is she good? Emily said. Hartman, is she someone who will actually... She's been trying to open this investigation for 4 years, Marcus said. She is not going to let anything happen to the primary witness. He looked up from the tablet. There is not just a man who disappeared, Emily. He is the person who completed the evidence chain that Hartman could never complete without someone on the inside. He understands exactly what Michael Carter risked to build what's on that drive. I'll not waste that. She hasn't met him yet, Emily said. Oh, Marcus said. But she's been reading his work product all night. And in my experience, reading what someone built under those conditions tells you more about a person than meeting them does. Emily drank the coffee. 5:43. Stone came in at 5:50 and said one word, time. They went out. The pre-dawn air was cold in the way that Montana mornings are cold, even in summer, a clean, specific cold that comes from altitude and open sky rather than from damp. Emily put her arms through her father's jacket properly, the sleeves all the way on, and zipped it to the collar. Others who had stayed through the night were already at their bikes. It was loud. Nobody was performing urgency. They moved with the quiet precision of people who understood the weight of what the next hour contained. And Emily and Hatch took a vehicle Stone's choice, bikes, for this particular approach. 2 other riders came in the same vehicle. The rest of the chapter held position at Marcus's property, if needed, out of the operational perimeter by agreement. They drove north. The road was dark and empty, and Emily watched the sky begin to change at the edges, that first almost imperceptible lightning that happens before there is any actual light, by simply becoming slightly less dark in the east in a way that is more felt than seen. There knew directions by the light. He had taught her that. She pressed her hand flat against the jacket above her heart. There, Daddy, she thought. I'm still coming. 5:58, they turned onto a county road, and Stone pulled the vehicle to the shoulder and cut the engine. Of them, in the dark, Emily could make out the shape of other vehicles, already positioned federal vehicles, though they were dark and quiet, and communicated their presence only through the fact of being there. Hatch was monitoring something on his phone. Team is in position, he said. 05 is the go. Emily looked at her watch. 5:59. The longest minute of her life began. Rusty. She was aware of everything Stone's breathing beside her, particular stillness of Hatch when he was paying attention, the way her own heartbeat had climbed to a rate that was not comfortable, but was, she recognized, exactly the right rate for this moment. She understood what was about to happen and was preparing itself with a clarity that felt almost impersonal, almost biological. Fight or flight, except there was no flight. There had never been flight, not for her, not since she stood in the middle of a highway with her hands raised. 05. In the distance, not far, not a dramatic distance, there was movement. Coordinated fast. She couldn't see details in the pre-dawn dark. She didn't try to. She watched the shape of it, the way a situation moves when trained people execute a plan they have prepared for. Hatch's phone vibrated. He read the screen. He said, 30 seconds, 40, 60, the longest 60 seconds since the minute before. Then Hatch's phone again. He looked at the screen, watched his face, watched it with the same attention her father had taught her to bring to all faces in important moments, and she saw the thing she had been waiting for. Release, the specific, unmistakable release of tension from a face that has been holding information that it was not yet time to share. They found him, Hatch said. He's alive. The sound that came out of Emily Carter at that moment was not a word. A cry, exactly. It was the sound a person makes when something they have been holding for 4 days so tightly that holding it has become structural. Part of how they are standing upright is suddenly allowed to exist as feeling instead of as function. John put his hand on her shoulder. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She pressed both fists against her mouth and breathed through the space between them and let the feeling move through her because she understood underneath all of it that her father had taught her this too. Feeling things completely is not weakness. It is the acknowledgement of what something was worth. Others. And this was worth everything. The next 20 minutes were operational in a way that required her to hold herself together again, because alive did not mean immediate, and immediate did not mean she could simply run toward him. There were federal protocols. There were medical assessments. There were things that had to be done in order so that what came after could stand up to the scrutiny it would inevitably face. Had explained all of this during the night, and she had listened and stored it, and now she drew on it the way she drew on everything her father had given her as a resource, as preparation, as evidence that someone had loved her enough to make her ready. She waited in the vehicle. Stone waited with her. Hatch moved between their vehicle and the federal coordination point, carrying information back in steady increments. Michael Carter had been held in a structure on the property for 4 days. He had been questioned but not physically harmed, beyond what 4 days of confinement and poor conditions produced. He was dehydrated. He was exhausted. He was, by the account of the first federal agent to reach him, entirely cognitively intact, and had immediately, upon being told a tactical team was on site, asked one question and one question only: "Is my daughter safe?" When Hatch told her that, closed her eyes. "Tell me the exact words he used," she said. Hatch looked at the text on his phone. The agent said he grabbed the agent's arm and said, and this is a quote, "There's a girl, 20 years old, blonde. She has my jacket. Is she safe?" Emily opened her eyes. "Love," she said. "I have his jacket." 12 minutes later, the federal agent came to the vehicle and spoke to Stone briefly and then looked at Emily. "Sir," he said, "your father is asking for you." She got out of the vehicle. The air was full light. Now the sun had come up somewhere in the last 20 minutes, in the way it does in Montana in June, and completely, as though it had been waiting just out of sight and simply stepped forward. She was aware of it on her face. She was aware of the gravel under her feet and the sound of voices ahead and the shape of people moving with the particular purposeful calm of a situation that has resolved without the worst happening. She walked. Stone fell into step beside her without being asked. There. She didn't tell him she was glad she didn't need to. He knew. They brought her through a perimeter and past 2 vehicles and around the side of a structure she didn't look at, because looking at the structure where her father had spent 4 days was not something she could do right now, and might not be something she could do ever. If someone stepped aside and there was a space, and in that space was a man sitting on the open tailgate of a vehicle with a blanket around his shoulders and a bottle of water in one hand and his head down. He heard her footsteps. He looked up. He looked exactly like her father, older by 4 days than he had ever looked, thinner across the face, something in his eyes that she recognized as a specific exhaustion of a person who has been holding on by will alone and has just been given permission to stop holding. But exactly like her father, she crossed the space between them in 3 steps. She didn't say anything, neither did he. Her arms around him, and his arms came around her, and the blanket, and her father's jacket, and everything they both were carrying, pressed together in the specific way that only a parent and child know the particular fit of 2 people who of each other's physical reality since before memory. She held him. After a long time, long enough that the people around them had gone back to their tasks and given them the distance that the moment required, he spoke. His voice came out rough and low, pressed against the top of her head. "I knew you'd find them," he said. She pulled back just far enough to see his face. "I stood in the middle of the highway," she said. He stared at her. He said. "It worked," she said. He made a sound, the same sound he had made on the phone, a laugh, but from the same place, from the same part of him that had always been Underneath all the careful and the quiet and the planning, fundamentally unable to contain joy when it arrived. The motorcycles, he said. 15 of them, she said. Of course you did. Stone sends his regards, she said. There went still. Not tense. Still. The particular stillness of a man receiving something he had thought about many times and had not allowed himself to anticipate. Stone is here, he said. He drove with me, Emily said. Ours. She paused. She didn't have a word that was large enough. He's been everything, Daddy. Everything you'd said they would be. Michael Carter looked past his daughter's shoulder. Huck was standing 20 feet away, watching, his helmet in both hands, making no move to approach. Michael handed the water bottle to the federal agent nearest him and slowly stood up. A blanket fell from his shoulders. He was wearing the same clothes he had disappeared in 4 days ago. It looked like a man who had been through something and had come out the other side of it, not broken but thoroughly used up, in the way that things that are built well show their stress without failing. Toward Stone. Stone did not move toward him. He waited. He had been waiting, in one way or another, 5 years. Michael stopped in front of him. They looked at each other. Everything that existed between these two men, the campfire in 1998 and the decision in 1997, and the phone call 14 months ago that hadn't been followed up, and the jacket on the hook, and the daughter on the highway, and the 4 days on a property belonging to people who thought they had made the problem disappear. All of it was present in the space between them. Michael put his hand out. Stone looked at it for a single second. Not a handshake, the other kind. The kind where both hands close around the other person's and the grip says what words do not have the precision to say. There, you kept your promise, Michael said. His voice was barely above a level where Emily, from behind him, could hear it. You kept yours, Stone said. The one you made when you left. You stayed clean. You protected her. You built something real. Michael nodded once. I was tight. I left you something dangerous on that drive, Michael said. Marauders, names, people who are going to fight this. Let them fight, Stone said. Remember, Marcus has it in the right hands. There's going to be a process, Michael said. Long one. There always is, Stone said. We'll be here for it. Michael looked at him. Have to ghost, Stone said. And the road name, the one Michael Carter had not heard spoken in 25 years, landed with the specific weight of something that had never stopped being true even when it was no longer used. Loreto, you stood up for this brotherhood when you didn't have to. Once in 1997 and once when you built that case and trusted your daughter to carry it. The crate doesn't clear. It doesn't go in one direction. How it works. Michael was quiet. You told me something at a campfire once, Stone said. I looked at him. You said the day you had a daughter, you finally understood what you were fighting for. Michael nodded. I remember. She stood in the middle of a highway in your jacket and stopped 15 motorcycles, Stone said. And then she found your evidence and your contact and your location in less than 24 hours. He paused. I think you should know that the thing you were fighting for turned out to know how to fight for itself. Michael Carter turned and looked at his daughter. Was standing in his jacket, the jacket that was too big for her and had always been too big for her, and that she wore now not because it was the right size, but because it was his. It smelled like him. Because it had been the thing she carried across 4 days and 400 miles, and a highway she had walked into without knowing if she would walk back out. I looked back at him. I kept it clean, she said. Jacket. I was careful with it. He laughed. A real laugh. Full and unguarded, the laugh she had grown up inside of, laugh that had filled the shop and the kitchen and the truck on long drives, laugh that was the most specific and irreplaceable sound she knew. To her and put both hands on her face. You kept yourself clean, he said. I cared about. She grabbed his wrists. Home, she said. We're going home. And for the first time in 4 days, Carter did not look like a man holding on. He looked like a man arriving. The drive back to Dillon took 2 hours. Carter sat in the passenger seat of his daughter's truck and did not speak for the first 40 minutes. Because he had nothing to say. Because he had too much. He was a man who had always needed to locate the right beginning before he could trust himself to speak. Emily knew this about him. She drove and said nothing and let him find it. Federal agents had cleared them to leave after a medical assessment confirmed Michael was stable dehydrated, underweight by several pounds, a bruise along his left ribs from the second day when he had tested the boundaries of where he was being held, and someone had communicated clearly that testing was not going to be rewarded. He had accepted the medical team's attention with the specific impatience of a man whose body is inconveniencing his ability to deal with more important things. He had signed 3 documents and answered 40 minutes of preliminary questions from a federal agent named Sorrento, who had the efficient, unhurried manner of someone who understood that the primary interview would happen later, and that right now the goal was triage. Stone and his riders had stayed at the perimeter through all of it, intrusively, not performatively, just present. There was in the way they had been present since the highway available, the specific kind of reliable that doesn't announce itself. Finally walked out of the federal perimeter with his daughter beside him and his jacket on her shoulders, and a bottle of water in his hand. Stone was there. And the exchange between them, the handshake, the words, the road name, spoken after 25 years, had been the only moment in the entire 4 days where Emily Carter had felt that the world had returned to something like its right shape. Most. Not all the way, not yet. She understood that. It was not a moment. It was a direction. Her father found the beginning somewhere around the 20-minute mark on the drive home. "To explain," he said. "You don't have to," she said. "Right now, I need to," he said. "Not for you. For me. I need to say it out loud to you specifically because you're the one I owe it to." She adjusted her hands on the wheel. He was quiet for another moment. "Organizing. Left the life," he said. "I made myself a promise. Whatever I had been and whatever I had done in that time, the person I was building was going to be completely clean. No residue. No connection to anything that could come back and land on you." He looked at the road ahead. I kept that promise for 23 years. I was proud of that. I built something real to shop. It's town. "You did," she said. And then in 2017, he said, "I started doing work for a contractor who moved freight for Meridian Logistics." "Is it a name now?" "I know it," she said. "It started small," he said. "Inconsistencies. A vehicle's manifest not matching its cargo weight. A driver who was nervous in a specific way that had nothing to do with being late on delivery. Things that individually meant nothing. Collectively, he stopped. I'm a mechanic. I see systems. I see how pieces fit." I started seeing a system I recognized. Not from Dylan. Before. Emily nodded slowly. "You'd seen people move things through legitimate operations before," she said. "Life? Yes," he said. "Not by us, by people adjacent to us. And I knew what it looked like because I had made a point of knowing what it looked like so I could keep our chapter away from it." He paused. 20 years later, it's in my shop. Through the front door, using my tools and my time and my reputation as cover. "So you started documenting it," Emily said. "Started documenting it," he confirmed. "Because I couldn't unknow what I knew. I could not look at what these people were doing and do nothing. I know you might think that was reckless, that I should have protected the life I'd built and walked away from something that wasn't technically my problem. I don't think that," she said. I did her. "I know you," she said. "I know exactly who you are. The idea of you walking away from something like that is it's not you. Well, it was never going to be you." He looked at the road again. Something in his face shifted. "Your mother used to say the same thing," he said. "My inability to ignore a wrong thing was simultaneously my best and most inconvenient quality." Her mother had died when Emily was 7. Almost never spoke about her directly. When he did, always like this sideways, in the context of something else. The only way he could access her without the grief being overwhelming was to come at her from an angle. Emily did not say anything. She let it be there. She had learned that too from him. Old Stone 14 months ago, because I had reached the point where the documentation was enough to matter, but I wasn't sure I could get it to the right people without being stopped. "First," Michael continued, "but I needed to know if the old promise still stood. if there were people who would move if I needed them to move. Why didn't you call him back? Emily said. After that first call, he said you said you'd call back and you never did. Michael's jaw tightened. Because 3 days after I called him, someone left a message on my shop door. Not a threatening message. Nothing I could take to the sheriff. A business card for Meridian Logistics with a handwritten note that said, looking forward to continuing the relationship. He paused. It was a message that said, we know you know, and we know you're talking to people, and we want you to understand that we are watching. Emily felt her fingers tighten on the wheel. So you stopped calling, she said. I stopped calling, he said. Because if they were watching me, calling Stone again was putting Stone in their line of sight. I was not going to do that. His voice was completely even. I built the case instead, quietly, on my own. And I set up the contingency, the jacket, she said. Pocket, the note, the envelope in the sedan. He glanced at her. I went through every hiding place I knew you would find. If you were thinking like me, and only play those places. Because if they searched the shop and I knew eventually they'd search like people who were looking for something. Like a daughter who was thinking like her father. You hid everything in places that required someone to love you in order to find them, Emily said. Quiet for a moment. I suppose that's one way to say it, he said. The right way, she said. The truck moved through the early morning on a highway that looked exactly like every highway Emily had driven her whole life, and nothing at all like itself. Aware of the particular feeling of a person whose understanding of ordinary things has been permanently expanded. The highway was still the highway. It was also the road on which she had learned that her father was more than she knew. The jacket on her shoulders was still his jacket, but now it was also the thing that had opened a door she hadn't known existed. Some knowledge, once you have it, makes the world bigger rather than smaller. This was that kind. There's something else, her father said. She heard it in his voice before he said it. The particular register of a man preparing to say the hardest thing in the conversation. She had heard it exactly twice before in her life, once when he told her mother wasn't going to recover, once when he told her that the scholarship she'd applied for had fallen through and he couldn't make up the difference, but they would find another way. Both times it had been the voice of someone who took the weight of difficult news personally, but who felt that the truth landing on someone you love is a thing you should absorb some of on their behalf. She said. He turned to look at her fully, not at the road. Deputy Director Hartman called me before we left the perimeter, he said. On Sorrento's phone, she wanted to tell me personally. Emily kept her eyes on the road. Oh, what? The names on that list, he said. All 7 of them. Hartman has been investigating Meridian Logistics specifically because of one name. And she's been trying to put enough evidence around for 4 years. You told me there was a judge, Emily said. Regional director. Yes, he said. The 3rd name on that list, the 3rd one is a man named Gerald Price. He is the assistant district attorney for a 3-county area that includes Dillon. Emily felt the truck do nothing unusual. The road was straight. Her hands were steady, and yet everything inside her lurched. She said. The same man who would have been responsible for any local criminal referral involving Meridian Logistics, her father said. The same man who would have handled any case the sheriff's office brought forward. He paused. The same man who told the sheriff's office 3 years ago that a complaint filed against a Meridian Logistics driver by a rancher outside of town was not worth pursuing. Emily thought about the sheriff, polite and unhelpful, about grown adults leave sometimes, weak. The sheriff wasn't protecting anyone, she said slowly. Oh, her father said. He just didn't know. He was told the ADA had reviewed it and it wasn't worth pursuing, and he accepted that because that's what you do when the ADA tells you something. You accept it. Michael's voice was tight now, not with anger. Colder and more precise than anger. Place had the whole local system protected. Anything that came up locally could be redirected or buried before it reached the federal level. I couldn't go through local channels. That's why I needed the federal contact. Well, he stopped. That's why they moved when they did, Emily said. She was working it through As she spoke, the way her father had always encouraged her to do, don't wait until you have all the pieces before you start reasoning. Reason with what you have, and let the reasoning find the gaps. Watched you for 14 months. They saw you were building something. They waited until they thought you were about to make contact with someone outside their reach. I made a call, her father said, 3 weeks ago, to a journalist I know in Helena, old friend. I didn't say anything specific. I was being careful, but I asked if she was still working on corporate accountability pieces. And she said yes, and I said I might have something for her. They were monitoring your phone, Emily said. They were monitoring my phone, he confirmed. And that call was enough. They didn't know exactly what I had or exactly where I had put it. They knew I was getting ready to move it, so they moved first. Emily was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Price, being taken into federal custody as of 5:30 this morning, her father said, simultaneously with the operation at the property. Hartman coordinated both. She'd been waiting for this, Emily said. 4 years, her father said. 4 years of trying to get enough to move and being shut down. And then your drive landed on Marcus's desk at midnight, and by 5 in the morning, she had everything she'd been missing. He paused. She said to tell you, and I am quoting exactly here, she said to tell the girl with the jacket that she just cracked a case 4 federal investigators could not crack in 4 years by standing in the middle of a highway. Emily stared at the road ahead. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then I just wanted my dad back. I know, he said. I was doing. I wasn't trying to crack anything. I was just...
Emily.
His voice was quiet and certain. The best things happen. Not because someone decided to be brave. Because someone decided they were not willing to accept the alternative. She drove back at the road, 40 miles outside of Dillon, and rang through the truck's speakers. The display said Stone. She tapped accept. You're on speaker, she said. My dad's here. A brief silence on Stone's end. Then, with the particular rough warmth of a man who is not naturally demonstrative and is choosing to be anyway, host. How are you holding up? Better than I look, Michael said. Apparently isn't saying much. You look like a man who needs a week of sleep and a decent meal, Stone said. I get there. Where are you? Emily said. 12 miles behind you, Stone said. Blow you in. Emily, there's something you need to know before you get to Dillon. She glanced at her father. Up at the speaker. What? She said. Patrice from the diner called Briggs about 20 minutes ago. Got his number from, actually, I don't know how she got his number. Patrice seems like the kind of woman who can find a number when she needs one. Despite everything, Emily felt something that was almost a smile. That's accurate, she said. Hours. She knows you're coming back, Stone said. She knows Michael is with you. Us. And she's been at the diner since 4 in the morning. Cooking, Michael said. Then a question. Cooking, Stone. Confirmed. Made a sound, a low exhale that was the specific sound of a man who's just been reminded that the ordinary world is still there and still contains the particular version of grace that exists in. People who show up with food when someone comes home. I'm gonna make the biscuits, Michael said. She'll know what I mean. I'll tell her, Stone said. 12 minutes behind you. The line clicked off. Emily took the exit toward Dillon. She had driven this exit 10,000 times. Looked exactly the same. The sign, the curve of the ramp, the first intersection where you could go toward the residential streets or toward the commercial strip where the diner sat next to the hardware store and across from the bank that had been there since her grandmother's time. They went toward the diner. Her father said nothing. He was looking out the passenger window at the town going past, and his expression was the expression of a man relearning. Something he already knew, the specific process of return that requires you to see a place. Through the lens of having almost lost access to it. Well, she had gone through that process for 4 days with the idea of him. Going through it now with the idea of home. In front of the diner. Before she had cut the engine, the door of the diner opened, and Patrice came out, a woman in her late 50s, who was built like someone who had carried heavy things her whole life and had developed an absolute authority about it, wearing an apron and moving with the specific, unhesitating purpose of a woman who has been waiting for something and is now done waiting. She came straight to the passenger side. Michael opened the door. Patrice looked at him for exactly 1 second, taking inventory, assessing the way the people who love someone practically take inventory when that someone has been through something, and then she put both arms around him and held on with the strength of someone who had spent 4 days not knowing and was now converting that not knowing into physical presence. Michael held on back, he said, into her shoulder. The biscuits, she said, pulling back and wiping her eyes with the corner of her apron with absolutely zero self-consciousness, in the oven for 40 minutes. Sit down, he laughed. Laugh again, the real one. Emily, coming around the front of the truck, heard it and felt it land somewhere behind her sternum like something clicking back into place. Inside, Patrice's diner at 6:30 in the morning on a Wednesday was normally quiet. A few ranchers, the woman from the post office who always came early, maybe a table of highway workers. Today it was different. There were people. Emily recognized Roy, who had driven in from wherever he was when he heard, still in his work clothes. The woman who ran the hardware store across the street, sitting near the counter with a coffee in her hands and the expression of someone who had come over without entirely planning to. Two men from the area who Emily knew were friends of her father's in the uncomplicated, specific way of men who drink coffee at the same counter for 15 years without ever talking about anything important and are therefore connected in ways that are harder to name but no less real. All heard. Small towns operate on a frequency that no one has ever fully explained. Information travels through them, not through deliberate communication, but through the particular osmosis of people who share the same daily geography. Nobody in that diner had been officially notified of anything. All of them were there. Michael walked in, and the room did something that Emily had never seen a room do for her father before. It went quiet, not the uncomfortable quiet of a situation nobody knows how to handle. Reverent quiet, the quiet of people who are in the presence of something they didn't know they'd been afraid of losing, until the possibility of losing it had been real. He stood up. He was a big man. Roy, big in the way of men who have spent decades doing physical work outdoors, a solidity that is not bulk but density. He had known Michael Carter for 18 years. He had built fences on 3 properties that Michael had helped him secure financing for. He had eaten breakfast at this counter beside Michael on at least 500 separate occasions. He was not, by anyone's assessment, a demonstrative man. He crossed the diner in 4 steps, and he put his hand on Michael's shoulder, and he said, "You scared the hell out of me, Mike." Michael looked at him. "No," he said. "I'm sorry, Roy." "Don't apologize," Roy said gruffly. "And eat." Michael sat. The diner exhaled. People began moving again, talking in low voices, pouring their own coffees the way regulars do in a place they know well enough to stop waiting to be served. Particular normalcy of ordinary people being ordinary reasserted itself around the extraordinary thing that had just walked through the door and sat down, and the ordinary and the extraordinary found a way to coexist the way they always do in small places where people know each other without ceremony and without ignoring each other. They're present simultaneously, both real. Emily sat beside her father. Patrice put a plate in front of each of them without asking what they wanted, as in Patrice's philosophy of care, asking what someone wanted when they had been through something was a waste of everyone's time. You gave them what they needed. The biscuits were there, their eggs, and something that smelled like the specific version of home that only exists in places where someone has been cooking for a long time with the intention of feeding people who matter. Ate. Emily ate. Neither of them spoke for several minutes, and it was not an awkward silence. A recovery silence. The kind that exists after a long physical effort, the cooling down, turn of the body to itself. Then Michael said, looking up from his plate, "You need to tell me everything." She looked at him. "Everything," he said. "From the moment you found the jacket. Look, every step, I want to hear all of it." She set down her fork. She started talking. She told him about the shop on the 3rd morning and the hook behind the door, the note and the cut in the lining, about putting the jacket on and looking in his mirror and seeing someone who looked determined, driving for 2 hours before the gas light came on. The specific quality of the sound of 15 motorcycles approaching on an empty highway, and the decision, not a decision, really, more like the absence of any other option, to step onto the pavement and raise her hands. Heather listened with the complete, uninterruptible attention he gave to things that mattered. He did not interject. He did not react visibly until she got to the part about Stone stepping off his bike and walking toward her. And then something moved in Michael Carter's face that was not quite a smile, but came from the same source. About the drive to Dillon and the marks on the storage door and the envelope in the sedan. About what Stone had said when he read the list of names, the judge, the regional director, and about Hatch taking the drive. About the drive to Marcus and the coffee and sitting in the spare room at 3 a.m, not sleeping. She told him about the call from Stone at 5:50 and getting into the vehicle and driving north in the pre-dawn dark. She told him about 6:05. She told him about Hatch's face when the text came through. Heather was not looking at his plate anymore. He was looking at her. When she finished, the diner had gotten quieter around them, in the way that happens when people near a conversation slowly realize they are near something that requires a different kind of listening than normal conversation requires. Michael Carter looked at his daughter for a long time. "All of that," he said. "I had help," she said immediately. "You had help because you went and got it," he said. "Help doesn't find you, Em. You know that." She looked at her coffee cup. "Was terrified the whole time," she said. "I want you to know that. I wasn't brave in the way people mean when they say brave. I was just too scared of the alternative to stop." "That's exactly what brave means," her father said. "Anyone who tells you different has never actually been in a situation that required it." The door of the diner opened. One came in first. Their Hatch, their Briggs, there's 5 riders. The ones who had made the drive north and the drive back, up the diner with a particular presence that changed the room, not through threat, but through mass. Through the specific gravity of people who take up physical and moral space in equal measure. Patrice looked at them from behind the counter. She looked at Emily. Emily gave her a small nod that meant, "These are the ones." Patrice, who had heard enough in the last several hours to have a general understanding of what the last 4 days had contained, the group of Hell's Angels riders standing in her diner at 6:40 a.m, and said, "Absolute authority of a woman who had been feeding people in this building for 22 years. Down, all of you. I'll get more plates." Nobody argued with Patrice. They sat. Michael stood up and crossed to Stone's table before the food arrived. Across from him. "I need to say something to you," Michael said. Stone looked at him steadily. "You don't owe me." "I know I don't owe you," Michael said. "That's what this is. I'm not paying a debt. I'm saying something true." He paused. "I spent 25 years being grateful that I left when I did. I built what I built. I never regretted it. But there were times," he stopped, looked at his hands. "There were times when I missed what it felt like to be part of something that moved with a common purpose, where the people around you didn't need things explained because they already understood the shape of what mattered." Stone didn't say anything. "I missed that," Michael said. "And watching what you did in the last 24 hours, what all of you did for a daughter of someone you hadn't seen in 25 years, of a promise, and because of who she is," he stopped again. Looked up. "I want you to know that whatever I contributed in 9,997, whatever I gave to this brotherhood, I consider it fully repaid, with interest. And that account is closed, and what remains between us is just," he searched for the word. Only Stone said. Michael nodded. "Tightly," he agreed. Patrice arrived with plates, and the conversation at that table became the ordinary conversation of people who have shared something large and are now finding their way back to the ground through smaller things, coffee and food, and the particular shorthand that develops between people who have been through something together and no longer need to explain the context of every reference. Emily watched all of it from where she sat. She watched her father eat Patrice's biscuits and talk to Stone and get his shoulder squeezed by Briggs and answer Roy's questions in the careful, partial way of a man who understands that the full story belongs to a legal process and cannot yet be given in its entirety to people who are simply people and not investigators. She watched the diner fill up. Further, as word continued to move through Dillon in its osmotic way, more people arriving with the slightly sheepish but unapologetic energy of people who have come not because they were invited, but because the situation called for presence. Hatch at a corner table with the USB drive in his hand and speak for several minutes in the low-controlled manner she had come to associate with him, and then put his phone in his pocket and look across the diner at Stone and give a single nod. Stone saw it. He looked at Emily. She raised an eyebrow. At her table. Hartman's team executed the second set of warrants at 7:15, he said quietly. There's 2 more individuals connected to the Meridian operation. Earl. Clean, he paused. Marcus says the chain is solid. There's documentation, plus the corroborating evidence from the property search. Holds. Emily let that land. It holds, she said. Holds, Stone said. She looked at her father across the diner. I was laughing at something Roy had said. His shoulders were down from where they had been in the truck, no longer carrying the particular set of a man who has been holding everything together through will. Incrementally, becoming the person he was before Thursday morning. It would take time, she knew that. The body has its own accounting of difficult things and presents the bill in its own schedule. The direction was right. The direction was always what mattered. At the jacket, which she had taken off and hung on the back of her chair, red patch, the loose stitching in 2 places, and the lining that she had carefully repressed. After removing the note and the drive, pressing the edges back together with her fingers in the way of someone who understood that a thing repaired imperfectly is still repaired. She had been wearing it for less than 24 hours, like she had been wearing it her whole life. After the plates were cleared and the diner had settled into the mid-morning rhythm of people who have reason to linger, Stone found her standing outside, holding the jacket in both hands, looking at the patch. Question, she said, when he came to stand beside her. Go ahead, he said. The patch, she said. What does it mean? On it. To wear it. My father never explained. He never explained anything about that part of his life. I've been wearing it for a day, and I don't actually know what I'm wearing. Stone looked at the patch, quiet for a long moment. The simple version, he said, our daughters, is that it represents a commitment to the brotherhood, up to keeping your word when it would be easier not to. He paused. The real answer is that it means different things to different people who've earned it. To your father, I think it meant having people who would move without being asked, and who understood the shape of what mattered without needing it explained. He looked at her, which is interesting. Why, she said. Because that's exactly what you did yesterday, he said. You didn't wait for someone to explain the shape of things. You found the information. You found the people. You moved. Hesitation, without waiting for permission. He looked at the patch. There never passed this jacket to you. He left it for you to find. She looked at him. What are you saying? She said. I'm saying that your father's jacket found its way to the right person, Stone said. I'm saying that the character represented by that patch, not the organization, not the history, just the character, was not left behind in a shop in Dillon. It was carried forward. Emily looked at the jacket for a long time. Then she looked up. There's something I need to ask you, she said. And I need you to answer it honestly. I'll do my best, Stone said. They built his case for 18 months alone, she said. I called you once, and then he didn't call back because he didn't want to put you in the line of sight of the people watching him. He protected you by going quiet. Yes, Stone said. Oh, if he had called back, she said. If he had called back 14 months ago and said, John, I need help, I need people, I need the brotherhood, would you have come then? There any of this before the highway and the drive north? Stone looked at her directly. Sure, he said, without hesitation, without softening it. Sure. Even then, he said, the moment I heard his voice on that call 14 months ago, there was yes. He didn't need to ask a second time. He just needed to say when. Emily nodded. She looked down at the jacket in her hands one more time. He put it on both arms, all the way, zipped to the collar. Stone, Tell him that, she said. If you get a chance, that's right, tell him that. Tell him. The answer would have been yes. Uh, I think he carries some weight about not calling back, trying to protect everyone alone for 14 months. Well, he needs to know it wouldn't have had to be that way. Stone looked at her for a moment. Well, he said, for someone who didn't know about any of this 48 hours ago, and you have an unusually clear read on all of it. He raised me, she said simply. Well, Stone almost smiled, the real version of almost close enough that it mattered. Sure, he said. He did. The federal process unfolded across the following weeks with the deliberate, unstoppable momentum of a case that has been built correctly by someone who understood both the evidence and its vulnerabilities. Deputy Director Hartman's name appeared in no press coverage. That was how she had wanted it. And Sorrento explained to Michael in one of several interviews that Hartman had spent 4 years being stonewalled by the people whose names were on the list and had no interest in being visible before every piece was locked. She would be visible when it was over. 7 people were indicted within 30 days. Harold Price resigned from his position as assistant district attorney 4 days after his arrest, the advice of counsel, in a statement that said nothing and explained nothing and convinced no one of anything. The judge named in the documentation requested a leave of absence that was denied. The regional director for Meridian Logistics was arrested at an airport. Harris Riley wrote a letter to Emily Carter, which he sent through Stone, just 3 paragraphs long, and said in its final paragraph that in his 30-year career in federal investigation, he had seen evidence packages built by trained professionals with full institutional resources that were less thorough and less durable than what Michael Carter had built alone over 18 months in a repair shop in Dillon, Montana. He said he wanted her to know that. He said he wanted her father to know that too. Michael read the letter at his kitchen table and said nothing for a long time. Then he folded it and put it in the drawer where he kept the things he considered important. And he made 2 cups of coffee and brought one to Emily and said, "I'll reopen the shop next Monday. Will you help me?" She said yes. Reopened on a Monday morning in July. The lot was swept. Walls were in their places. The old radio was plugged in for the first time since Thursday morning, 3 weeks before, when a cup of coffee had gone cold on a desk and a truck had sat in the lot and a silence had started. He came by before 10 and leaned against the counter and pretended he had a question about his truck. Patrice sent over a box of pastries with a note that said, because it's the first day back and first days deserve something sweet. Several customers arrived who had clearly organized among themselves to bring their vehicles in that week, all of them with genuine repair needs, but all of them with a genuine need to be in the shop and see Michael Carter behind the counter. He was there. He was exactly himself. He was also something more than himself, the way people are something more after they have been tested in a way that confirmed what they were made of. Not different. Distilled. Stone called at noon. Michael answered. Emily listened from across the shop, giving him the privacy of her back turned, though in a shop that size, the privacy was largely symbolic. Her father say, "We're open," and then, "Thank you." Stone. And then after a pause, something lower that she couldn't quite hear. She heard Stone's voice, tinny through the phone, say something that made her father go quiet for a moment. They said, "I know. I should have called back." Stone said something. They said, "She told you." Stone said something else. They looked across the shop at Emily's back. She could feel him looking. She kept her eyes on the part she was cataloging. He said into the phone, "Yeah, she did." And his voice had the particular quality of a man who is smiling but doesn't want to make it a whole thing. He hung up. He came to stand beside her at the parts shelf, put up the part she was cataloging, and turned it over in his hands the way he handled all parts, with the automatic, habitual attentiveness of a man who had spent his life understanding that things function correctly only when they are understood correctly. John says the chapter is planning to ride through Dillon in August, he said, officially, just passing through. Emily looked at him. Officially. On their way to somewhere, he said, but with the entirely unconvincing casualness of a man inventing an explanation he knows is not being believed. "Else," she said. "They'll probably stop for coffee," he said. "Police will be thrilled," she said. He set the part down. "At her, he said. She looked at him. "There? I've been trying to find the right way to say something since morning," he said. And I think the right way is probably just to say it without finding the right way." "Okay," she said. "I raised you to be capable," he said. "I taught you to navigate and to pay attention and to think like the person who hid the thing if you want to find the thing. I taught you to read faces and to sit with your back to walls and to know that careful people make careful enemies." He paused. "Myself, I was teaching you general life skills. There are things a person should know." "I know," she said. "But the truth is I was afraid," he said. "Underneath all of it, I was afraid that the life I'd left was not as fully behind me as I wanted it to be. From that time could still reach us. I prepared you, not consciously, not with a plan. I prepared you because I loved you too much to leave you unprepared." Emily was quiet. "What I need to say," her father continued, "is that I am sorry I was afraid. And I am not sorry for a single thing I taught you. And I am more proud of you than I have words for. Three things are all true at the same time, and I've been sitting with all three of them for 3 weeks, and I think the way to hold all three is just to say them out loud and let you do what you want with them." Emily looked at her father. About a highway and a jacket and 15 motorcycles and a note in her father's handwriting that said, "The people who wear this patch keep their promises." About Stone reading the note with both hands, Hatch taking the drive, about Briggs in the spare room at 2 in the morning. Her father's voice on the phone saying, "Of course you did. Of course you did." She thought about 8 hours in the pre-dawn dark and a man on the tailgate of a vehicle with a blanket on his shoulders looking up. She put the part down. She put her arms around her father. "A lot on. I know all three are true," she said. "I'd do it again tomorrow." He made a sound against the top of her head. "I know you would," he said. "That's exactly what scares me." "Good," she said. "I bet that means I'm ready." He held her tighter. And in the repair shop in Dillon, with the radio playing something neither of them was paying attention to, and the lot swept clean, and the tools in their places, and the old sedan in the corner that had once held an envelope with a name on it and a secret inside it, mother and daughter, who had spent 4 days on opposite sides of something that could have broken both of them, stood in the middle of the life they had built together and understood, not with words, with the specific, irreducible certainty that only comes from having been tested and having held that what they had was not luck. It was not coincidence. It was the result of a man who had loved a person well enough to prepare her, who had loved a man well enough to refuse to stop. That was the whole story. That was all of it. And a jacket, old and faded and slightly too large, hung on the hook behind the office door, where it had always hung not as a relic, as a trophy, but simply as a thing that had been exactly what it needed to be at exactly the moment it was needed. Some things are like that. The best things always are.